Welcome to another episode of Ice Ice Beta, a podcast about alpine ice climbing, mixed, and dry tooling. And I'm your host, Vanilla Snice. Aaron Gary. Today, we're talking about the Beartooth Mountains in Montana, which have a history of minimal spray when it comes to ice climbing. So, of course, that's what we're going to do. Let's start with why you should go. 1. If you're looking for first ascents or a first ascent-like day out, the Beartooths provide. 2. It's the largest uninterrupted landmass above 10,000 feet, or 3,000 meters, in the US outside of Alaska. 3. There's not a single path to any climbing objective. In other words, if you're looking for a challenge, it's easy to find one. What's not easy to find, though, is info. That's where Akio Joy and Anju Samuelson come in. As co-owners of Beartooth Mountain Guides, along with Austin Hart, the duo want to help make the area more accessible by sharing beta and welcoming visitors to explore the area beyond Granite Peak and the beaten path. The Beartooths are located about halfway between Bozeman and Cody, and just north of Yellowstone, making it a natural stopover for winter climbing trip if you're in the area and looking for something a bit more adventurous. Listen on to hear what makes it such an impressive backcountry venue and what it's like to grow a guiding company in Montana. Of course, thanks as always to our supporters on Patreon and to our new patron this week, John. You rock, man. Hey, Anju. Hey, Aki. Thanks so much for joining today.
Hey, Aaron.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
So, a Californian and a European are running a guiding company in Red Lodge, Montana. How did you two end up there?
Well, when you live in Bozeman, you know of the Beartooth Mountains and you recreate there if you're really into just rock climbing, alpine climbing, skiing. And we've definitely spent quite some time in the Beartooth when we were living in Bozeman. And once we knew we were becoming part owners of Beartooth Mountain Guides, it was pretty clear that we need to move to Red Lodge and be at the source of everything and just explore the mountains more and get them better to know.
Yeah, that pretty much encapsulates it. We're both guides, and we had the opportunity to become partners with Beartooth Mountain Guides, and yeah, this is kind of the center of it. So that's how we ended up in Red Lodge, and
Yeah, but our first destination was definitely Bozeman and not Red Lodge. Me coming from Berlin and Aki coming from California.
yeah, and I lived in Bozeman for probably 10 years before we moved here. We've been in Red Lodge for about 2 years now. I ended up in Bozeman for school. I guess that's how you got there too.
Yeah, I did do an exchange semester in Bozeman in 2018.
If I recall correctly, Anju, everyone in Europe was like, "You're going to go to Bozeman? Why would you go to Bozeman?"
Well, yeah, I haven't even heard of Montana actually before I researched it. But when I looked on a map, I was like, "Wow, it's close to Canada. It's a really big state. It's bigger than Germany, just from like the space." And I knew, well, there are gonna be mountains and big open spaces. Was only like 1 million people in population, so I was looking forward for a different nature experience that you can't really find in Europe, and I found it.
Aki, you came from outside of, well, I guess, was it Lake Tahoe area or just outside?
I tell that to people, but I grew up in Placerville, which is like an hour southwest of Lake Tahoe on Highway 50. Definitely not Lake Tahoe. Pretty. It's like in the foothills.
Lot of apple orchards.
Yeah, it's called Apple Hill for people from Sacramento or the Bay coming up to eat apples. But yeah, I grew up like skiing and doing a little bit of climbing in the area, and Bozeman's pretty well known for being a good ski destination. So that's how I ended up going to school there. Pretty much was, I think the cover of MSU's brochure then was like somebody skiing at Bridger Bowl. Like, oh, this seems like a good fit.
And how did you two meet?
We met pretty much in the second week or so when I got there, and I was checking out an apartment from a friend, just like a room, and Aki was a friend that was living in his car and or like in his van, in his nice built out van actually, in front of the house, and he was just around.
It wasn't on some like epic backcountry trip, just as simple as move-in weekend.
Yeah.
You want to do a retake and make up a better story? That's sweet. So I guess fast forwarding to Red Lodge, what's the reception been like as new co-owners of Beartooth Mountain Guides? Because the company has a long history in the area, no?
Yes, it has a long history and was founded like almost 20 years ago by a famous alpinist, Rob Hart. And I think the reception is pretty good because people see that we're just doing actual things and we're guiding different objectives besides Granite Peak and we're doing winter stuff and we're doing ice. I mean, basically, we're making the Beartooth Mountains more accessible because people can go with us.
Yeah, my impression of the reception has been generally good. I think that people are just psyched to have some, new energy to the business and in town. In general, the Beartooths have a history of not talking about or just writing about much of the climbs. So like when we advertise, I'm sure that that might create some friction with some people, but in general, we've been pretty warm reception and the community here in Red Lodge is great. And they've been very welcoming to us.
Yeah, we're almost like a lookout for people, especially on like Instagram or in our newsletter because we write about different objectives and climbs and people don't really usually know about that. There's a book called Select Alpine Climbs of Montana and that book is really poor information. I would say it's almost dangerous to follow that description and people are pretty excited to see like these climbs and these things that they can actually do. So it is like a little view into the Beartooth Mountains through us.
Well, how are people finding out about the Beartooths now? I mean, I think you talked about it's sort of like a word of mouth kind of endeavor.
When you live in Montana or even in Wyoming, in the general region, chances are you know about the Beartooths. There's a pretty rich climbing history here that you just will catch kind of weird stories where you're like, is that, real? Or like, how embellished is this story? And you know about like a couple of specific climbs probably, and especially living in Bozeman or just in Montana in general. The Beartooths, they are the tallest mountains in Montana. They have the most square mileage above 10,000 feet in the lower 48 for any mountain range, I believe. So you know that they're this kind of alpine destination. I think that granite, like alpine good granite, is really rare in the Rockies. So when you think of destinations that have good granite climbing, you're often thinking of like, oh, I have to go all the way to the Winds. But there's actually some pretty impressive walls in the Beartooths that everybody knows about, just nobody climbs. So when you're looking for a challenge, it's easy to find one in the Beartooths. And I think that living in Bozeman, you're like, we want to go climb Kelly Ice, we want to go climb the doublets, or even people hear about it from Granite Peak. A lot of people climb Granite Peak.
But you already have to be a somewhat experienced alpine climber in order to be able to recreate, besides like Granite Peak has a lot of information online, but pretty much all other objectives are somewhat obscure and I can't understand why people then go rather to the Winds because there's a ton of information that they can follow and here they can't.
Certainly more of an adventure. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
And it sounds like just the adventure nature of the area sort of fits with this quote that I found on your blog. The quote is, "Many take the path well worn, but they're only given a half-lived life." Does that resonate with you? And do you think that describes your mindset and your approach to your climbing and your life journey and maybe how you're thinking about building Beartooth Mountain Guides?
Yes, definitely. I think me and Aki have both a mindset of questioning what is the norm, why is that the norm, and why can't we be different? I feel like, especially, I'm just gonna talk a little bit about you.
That's fine.
um, what I know about Aki is when he started to get into the whole guiding thing, is people would always ask, "Oh yeah, that's like your summer job, right? Like, what are you actually doing?" And it's not. I would say in mainstream society, it's like being a guide or just definitely doing your own thing or like opening your own business or even your van business or whatever is not seen as like a successful or purposeful career or whatever. And I think following in or like making your own path That's definitely in our philosophy. For the business, yeah, that fits really well. I have never really thought about that. That fits really well actually to the Beartooth Mountains. And like creating or like growing a guide service here. Of course, Red Lodge is really small and there's no major metropolitan areas around, so it's actually not that easy to get climbers here or clients, but it just has so much potential that it will grow naturally, and we believe in that.
Yeah, literally, there is not a single beaten path to any climbing objective here. And there's a trail in the Beartooths called the Beaten Path that's really famous. It's probably the most famous piece of terrain in the Beartooths, and it's the
The most
only
traveled one too.
yeah, it's the only trail that we actually do not guide on at all.
It sounds like there's a lot of opportunity for you in the Beartooth. I mean, to educate, to share more about the options, but you're also doing things like all women's ice climbing events, and I think Anju, you run or help organize the Montana Women's Climbing Festival, correct?
So we were talking today about, oh, what are our goals with the business? And we have like these very simple ones that are we want to make a living of it and we want to provide other guides a diverse full-time workflow in their season. So that's kind of something that we're definitely naturally striving for. And me growing up as a female in the city of Berlin, I did not have any access to mountains and got later into it when I was 20 and I started to go sport climbing in a different part of Germany. And I mean, I've just experienced myself. I'm still experiencing it, and I see it in many other women in the sport that they're pretty limited socially in their journey. And that just comes from obviously like a lot of feedbacks from their environment, like men going climbing with them, but only because I actually want to hook up with them, and or their opinion is not as important or questions, or they're just quiet to, for example, in like an avalanche scenario when you're back in the mountains. And there's just a lot of potential to grow for a better representation and just like more fun for women in general to recreate and to not drop their sport because they don't feel like they're hanging out with people that appreciate them as much as they would like to be appreciated. Yeah, just these courses mean a lot to me because they're really fun for me. I always feel really appreciated. There's no doubting my skills or my experience. And I think that women usually feel more inclined to book a course if they know, oh, there's going to be other women. Of course, it doesn't mean I'm going to feel 100% comfortable, but at least I know I will have people that I can relate to. And that's why I just did like a yoga and rock climbing retreat with a friend in the Beartooth Mountains. And then we're doing a backcountry ski course that's like focusing a little bit on leadership skills in terms of your opinion matters, even if it's just like a feeling in your stomach and you don't have the knowledge, you should still speak up. And yeah, ice climbing trip to Cody, which will be super fun too because we're all staying together in one Airbnb and having dinner together and whatnot. Yeah. And yeah, the Montana Women's Climbing Festival, I started that in 2021 was the first event. And there's so many female climbers in Montana that are know each other, but that doesn't mean that they actually hang out. And they kind of form like these little cliques and groups. And it was really nice to get them all together, especially at the first event. You look around and you see how full your community is actually, and from how many people you can learn and in so many different ways. And yeah, it's been doing well. I think it's growing.
Did you always want to be guides? Because Aki, you're IFMGA certified, and Anju, you're apprentice alpine and assistant rock guide.
No, I not always. I went to MSU to study mechanical engineering, and who knows? When I was really young, I probably wanted to be like an astronaut or something, but quickly learned that just wasn't for me, and that climbing was really what I loved doing, climbing and skiing and just being outside. And it seemed like I had met a guide. I had actually hired a guide to learn how to place gear when I was probably a senior in high school, and his lifestyle was inspirational to me at the time. When I was a freshman in college, I wanted to drop out and just start guiding, and my parents made me stick in school. Because of that, I was able to kind of like break into the guiding industry because it's not that easy to make a living. So while I was in school, I was able to guide over the weekends and then during the summer. By the time I graduated, I became a certified rock guide at the end of that, and I was able to guide full time more or less. So then it just became what I did after university. And I had like a math teaching degree, and I was prepared to start teaching, and I substituted for a bit, and it just didn't stick. I don't know, the path of guiding, I guess, just called me more.
Yeah, I never thought about becoming a guide ever. And I think especially in Europe, this whole being a mountain guide. So first of all, you can't guide if you're not fully certified. If you're not all three disciplines. And yeah, it was just this elitist group to me that was somewhere far back, on the horizon that I would never ever in my life have access to just because I didn't grow up in the Alps. So how can that be ever possible? And I've never actually met guides, right? That was just like my perception. I had no idea. Even where I lived in Styles in Germany, where I learned how to rock climb, there were no guides around just because we were still like 3 hour drive from the Alps. And when I moved to Montana, I moved into this house that was actually full of guides and just general mountain recreationists. So I just, yeah, I learned about what they actually do and whatnot. And in the beginning, I was like looking at Aki's work and I was like, well, I really don't want to do that. I don't want to just like take out randos. That just seems, I'm also a little bit introverted, I would say, in that sense that I don't really like small talk or talking to people that much in general. And Americans are just a different, type of
No,
people
you're
anyways.
doing great.
Thanks. I'm getting better. I'm learning. You can definitely learn small talk. If anybody thinks they can't do it, it's definitely learnable. But I have to say that I started climbing guiding in 2021 was the same company that Akio was working at. Because I wasn't so sure of my path anymore either, and I love being outside. I have a really hard time staying inside and being on a computer for more than 4 hours, and most jobs require like at least 6 to 8 hours, and I just get really, yeah, I get depressive too, and just it just makes me kind of unhappy. So being outside is definitely the solution. Um, and it took me like the last 3 years to decide that even when we bought this business, I was like, I don't know if I want to continue guiding. I don't know if this is actually for me. I'm not really a guide. Looking around me, all these other dudes that are super strong in whatever they do, especially in Bozeman. But I have recently made the decision that I want to be a guide and invest everything into that path.
Rock on. Congratulations.
Thanks.
I mean, what's really interesting to me about that path is it speaks to the power of your environment. I mean, it seems like it completely reframed your outlook and what the options are. Do you think about that in the context of your guiding, the experience you want to cultivate for your clients?
Yeah, for sure. It's like, how does the environment look like? And is the environment inviting enough for you to feel like you can be part of it?
What I notice about the way that you write about yourselves and your company is you tend to be more uh like open and vulnerable than the general guide. For example, Anju, your soul backup articles is are really compelling and interesting. Maybe do you just want to talk about like what this series was and what you're hoping to accomplish with it?
Well, definitely of me privately as a business generally, I mean, can't say because we have different guides that work for us, and we obviously always make clear that they need to assess the boundaries of their clients and they need the clients to assess that as well and have an open conversation going on that, right? Because there's this mentality of like just pushing through for whatever cost. And I feel like our guides in general have not that mentality, and they're very safety focused and generally like well-being focused rather than, okay, you paid for this, so we're gonna get you up because I'm like a super strong guide and doesn't matter how weak you actually are, we can make it work, you know? So we're definitely not fostering that kind of culture. Yeah, for example, I'm definitely trying to see that I'm not the only woman on board in our business, um, which is actually not that easy, especially in Montana, to find other females. But we're definitely making an effort towards that because we believe that more diversity is definitely better for our business in general.
I'm surprised that there aren't more female guides in Montana. Like, where are most female guides? I mean, there's
Do you know the stats on, or do you have some stats on female guides?
uh I think that my numbers are outdated, but I think it was something like about 10% of guides, fully certified guides in the US were female, right?
I think it's a little bit less than 10%, and that's
It's like,
significantly higher than in Europe, right?
yeah,
It's like closer to like,
it's like 2%.
yeah,
Oh, wow.
but
Okay.
Montana's no exception to that.
Yeah, just the landscape of Montana not having I mean, we have a very small population compared to like the Colorado area, Washington, California, and we have very few guide services as well. And I wouldn't say that these guide services have like a very diversity fostering culture to begin with. Um, but there's just, I think, less opportunities even here in Montana.
I feel like a big part of it is the accessibility of the guiding here. Like I think of areas in Washington or Red Rock or something, like you can get into intro level guiding really early on, and you can kind of put your foot in the water and check it out with some top rope guiding or whatnot. And there's not a lot of options like that in Montana. So it's maybe less accessible here. And so I think that's probably a challenge for a lot of people. Is like, if you want to guide here to make it work, you're going to have to guide ice all winter and do some backcountry skiing, some AVI courses, maybe take a couple of mountain trips and then some occasional top rope guiding and multi pitch. And that's a very experienced guide to be able to do all of that.
You mentioned earlier that there's not a strong spray policy when it comes to the Beartooths, but here we are. We're going to spray about it. So, do you mind just sharing, because this is a podcast about ice climbing and mixed and dry tooling, um, what makes the Beartooth special for ice climbing?
Well, anybody who's looking for a big adventure in a backcountry setting, just because of the lack of information and the severity of the terrain. So, for anybody like that,
Yeah, I think that for folks who are objective oriented or want to have an adventure, whether it's a first ascent or climbing a route that has very little information, play some pitons, figure out their descent on their own, maybe manage some avalanche hazard. There's a lot going on, and it's a good place to like take all these skills that you've learned in other spots. Like for us coming from Bozeman, having lived there for a while, you play and highlight a lot and you learn all these skills and you mix climb, you scratch around when you climb steep pillars and stuff. And then to be able to apply that in like a real mountain setting where you're up in the alpine on a huge day, big approach, and there's a lot of question marks. There's no post on Instagram about somebody having climbed this route last week, so it's uneven. It's like pretty common to go for a walk with your gear.
for 2 hours,
Yeah. But that's appealing, and because what's the point if it's easy?
it has more the, yeah, explorer mindset. And for somebody who's looking for a challenge, because going climbing in an ice park or, like well maintained multi pitch areas um, can be maybe even boring at some point.
Can you just talk a bit more about the types of climbing to expect? Like, how does it compare, let's say, to Cody in that regard? So, for example, there's a lot of FA potential, it sounds like, but because there's not a lot of traffic, like even if you're going out, it might still feel like an FA, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big part of the no spray policy. The idea behind that was that if you don't record your routes, then everybody has the same first descent experience, which is kind of cool. But it also, it's a bummer that people aren't out enjoying these awesome climbs. Um,
Because it is definitely some work you have to put in because the climb might be not in, or you might not even find it, or the avalanche danger turns out to be different than you expected, and then you might need several tries to actually make it work. Rather in Cody, you're gonna have a sprint from the parking lot with all the other climbers to your destination, and whoever gets there first, starts to climb first and definitely a little bit more hooked out. So it's a different experience on that regard.
yeah, Cody's like a high concentration of water ice in one valley. You drive down the valley, limited snow. I mean, the approaches can be pretty burly, but very straightforward. You're like, oh, I see the climb. I'm going to walk up this gully up to the climb and climb it. And a lot of the climbs are you climb through a little band of rock. So it's like a pitch, walk type of deal. And the Beartooths, it's just more like a classic mountain range where it's a huge area. We don't have any density of climbs like the South Fork and Cody, but we have quite a few climbs around here that are just destinations and goals of their own. Like you're going to walk however far you need to walk to get to it. And it's our multi pitches are generally more like classic multi pitches where you're building a belay, hanging there, and then climbing the next pitch instead of like, climbing a pitch and walking a ways. And like in Cody, you don't usually need cams or rock protection or pitons or anything like that. In the Beartooths, I would say there's pretty much no bolts on most of our climbs, or very few bolts on the ice routes, the alpine routes. And you generally would want to bring a couple of cams, unless you're climbing like Cali ice in March, then you'll be fine with a couple of screws. But for the most part, yeah, cams and nuts and some pitons are pretty handy if you're gonna go find something new to adventure on. But for the most part, natural protection is abundant and pretty good because it's all in granite. It's not in that Choss limestone or whatever highlight is made out of conglomerate. That's really bad rock. Entire pitches fall off.
It sounds like it's an alpine playground in its own right, but also maybe like a training ground for larger ranges. Would you say that's accurate?
Oh yeah.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, the approaches here are on the scale of bigger ranges for sure.
Could you just share more specifics along those lines then? So like what would a typical day out be like? Maybe you could do like typical day to California ice and then like a typical day to like a more backcountry setting.
Well, like Cali Ice is a pretty backcountry setting. You would drive into East Rosebud and park at the very end of the road, the parking lot, and start hiking up a trail for not too long, unfortunately, though. And then you already start to get into Talus and couple. What are you gonna say?
The Talus, I would say that it's not, you're like subalpine at that point, but there was a burn some years ago. So there's not a ton of snow in the Talus field, but there's usually enough snow to make it very challenging to walk on the Talus because it's like lichenated. There's dead trees everywhere. You're not like bushwhacking, but you're definitely battling uphill. And then, at some point after 1,000 or 1,500 feet of elevation gain for Cali, you would then start ice climbing essentially.
On
And you
like very low angle ice where the actual climb doesn't even begin yet.
probably like 1,000 feet of vertical ice scrambling essentially. It makes it a very challenging guiding objective. I mean, for a normal party, probably 3 hours to the base of Cali ice and an exhausting 3 hours. And for a very fit party in good conditions, it could be like an hour and a half. But it's very condition dependent and it's hard to know unless you're there because not many people are going there and posting about it or sharing current conditions. And it's funny because Cali Ice, when you're topping out, you can see your car. It's like just right down there. So in a way, it is not a backcountry setting, but you're far away from your vehicle when you're at the top of the climb. And it's common for folks to take 12 hours to climb something like that. But even just further down the valley to compare it to Ice Dragons, that's an early season climb, also visible from the car, but a couple more miles back and probably another 1,000 or so feet higher in elevation. And that's a pretty remote setting for a climb. Like a 4-hour approach is common for that. The vast majority of it's off trail and loose, big blocks and just not easy. And yeah, even in the summer here to get to Granite Peak, you're like, this is, it's a big day to cross all this talus and cover all this mountainous terrain.
There's no easy out.
Yeah. There are some climbs close to the car though. I mean, like we take folks to Hell Roaring Falls. That's a 10-minute approach on a trail. The
Rock Creek Falls.
Rock Creek Falls,
It's like 45 minutes, which is pretty short as well.
Yeah, there's various other somewhat close to the car climbs, or more time spent on trail.
I was reading an Alpinist trip report. So September 10th, 2020, Aaron Mulkey, Dane Stedman, and Natalie Afanina climbed a 3-pitch mixed route. Is that typical for the season to start that early?
We actually just saw some ice yesterday up at the pass. So the pass is up at like 10,000 feet, and it snowed last weekend, and the pass just opened yesterday. So there was a ton of snow, and we saw some ice and some rock faces.
Yeah, I don't know exactly where their route is, but I wouldn't surprise me if the ice we were looking at was what they had climbed because it's like directly underneath the highway. As far as the Beartooths goes, that's about as easy as access could ever get, as long as the pass is open.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a very long hike. But September 10th is, I would say, pretty early for any ice.
Yeah.
By October, you can find ice, but early September is. I wasn't surprised, but I was happy to see some ice forming yesterday. A lot of the ice climbing here is best done early season and late season, primarily because it gets too cold in the middle of winter and those freeze-thaw cycles kind of close out in the alpine.
So just to help map it out in people's heads, what are the main areas? This East Rosebud, Rock Creek Canyon. Do you mind sort of giving like a lay of the land?
Well, where we're at the kind of like this southeast part of the Beartooth Mountains, everything is kind of like divided into drainages. So those are your access points, and you can pretty much find ice in every drainage. And each drainage obviously leads to a different part of the Beartooth Mountains, but some drainages lead you to more spectacular, bigger mountains quicker than other. So, for example, East Rosebud, West Rosebud, the West Fork, Main Fork, Lake Fork, those are all drainages that are close to Red Lodge and Billings and Cody. And then you can talk about Live Highway area.
Oh yeah, on the south side of the range, it'll be over the Beartooth Pass, but in the winter we have to drive around the mountains and then up a different pass towards just an end of the road, basically on 296. There's the Chief Joseph Scenic Byway, and that has the Clark's Fork of the Yellowstone, which is a pretty incredible climbing venue, both for rock and ice. But above that is like Jim Smith Peak, and that zone is very poorly documented and hosts some probably some of the best climbs in the Beartooths. As far as pure water ice routes go, there's like 600 to 800 foot water ice fives there, and they're pretty spectacular and just in a weird location. There's probably some information online, but it doesn't do it justice. And that's probably one of the main venues for the Beartooths, but it feels more sub-alpine. It's not like the standard mountain type of deal, but all the drainages are a little different. They have different characteristics. Some are warmer, some get more snow. The access is really critical. Like the Main Fork, we can snowmobile up in the winter. Same with the West Fork. And like East Rosebud and West Rosebud are maintained, so you can drive up them in the winter. That's pretty huge. The Stillwater is very broad and wide and cuts through the whole mountain range, so it's a lot warmer, higher volume flows. You need a cold snap for them to come in. So they all have their own characteristics. A lot of ice.
Is this just where like Matt Cornell and Jackson Marvel are hanging out and just not talking about their climbs? Because I feel like it's just there must be a bunch of just like local crushers, right?
There's a good number of local crushers, I would say. Matt and Jackson, they just did a route with Chantel in East Rosebud recently, a big wall rock climb that's on a very impressive wall, like kind of half dome sized, only 3 miles from the car. Kind of crazy. Uh, uh, but I think the crushers around here are kind of in and out, and the people who set up in the Beartooth area are kind of less frequent and maybe less known about. There's definitely been some like really strong climbers in the area that maybe didn't write a bunch about what they did or something. So
If you're able to, do you want to talk about the history a bit of the area or about some of those earlier climbers?
I mean, I can gloss over it a little bit. We're not I wouldn't say we're super well versed with the history in the area. There's definitely a lot of other people, and so much of it is word of mouth that some of it,
It's very hard to get it right.
yeah, totally. You hear all these different stories, but there were a lot of not famous, but well-known climbers in the area who did a lot of impressive climbs. Like a household name might be Jack Tackle, but it was a pretty strong climbing community around here, I think, in the early 70s. And they did a lot of the really impressive routes given the time and then what they had access to here in Montana then, and also just how dangerous some of those routes are. The doublets were climbed in the 70s, I believe, which is pretty crazy to me. Cali Ice is called Break a Leg Falls originally. Somebody broke their leg at the base of it on the first attempt, crawled out. We just had some local tell us that story again. And yeah, and there's been like generations of climbers in the area in the 80s and 90s that have been pretty low key and quiet, that have been doing just as impressive ascents, and they just aren't being recorded. The more we climb around here, the more we kind of like uncover about them. And they're kind of just rumors, but they often tend to hold out to be true.
Why hasn't Joe Josephson written a guidebook yet?
Not on the Beartooths?
Yeah.
I mean, he includes climbs in the Beartooths and his winter dance book.
Yeah, his winter dance book is pretty comprehensive for the pure water ice climbs that come in every year. But it'd be really hard to write a thorough guidebook on the Beartooths because there's so many routes that everybody's heard a little bit different story on.
Well, yeah, and then you need to climb every single one actually to make an accurate description, and that takes a long time.
Yeah, or even to contact all these people, it's like,
But they don't even remember the information
exactly,
anymore. It's
yeah.
like, I don't know.
Yeah, at some point it just starts to fade away. So in a way, it's really important to document it, just to record what's happened.
Do you think you'll play a role in that at all?
I do see us playing a minor role in that. Because we are very supportive of documenting. We're like younger, newer generation, perhaps. And maybe that is subject to change our stance on that. But like, however it ends up happening, we would probably be helpful in supporting with information on routes. And folks who reach out to us asking about conditions, that's not uncommon. I mean, we'll send topos, share current conditions. And even on our Instagram, on Beartooth Mountain Guides, when we post a picture of Cali ice, just like seeing conditions for ice climbs, that's pretty huge. But documenting new routes, probably won't be sharing a ton other than with accessible climbs. So like when we equip or climb a route that's great for us and our clients, and then probably a wider base of climbers, it's pretty nice to share that with folks. And then more people climb it and it just gets better.
I heard there are grizzly bears.
Yeah, but they're hibernating in the winter.
In the spring and fall, they're definitely around and they're active. That's when we see them the most in the Beartooths, or evidence of them the most.
I think what's worrying is more the mountain runners that go on their trips solo, obviously pretty deep into the mountains. And that's kind of scary. But as long as you're in a group,
And I can get my nomics off my pack pretty easily, you know.
You mentioned other hazards, which is avalanches, obviously. Do you mind just talking about that and where they come in and what to look out for?
The Beartooths, a lot of the tops of they're basically glacial valleys. You can correct me if I'm wrong here. They're glacial valleys, and there's a lot of plateaus at the top. And so when you think about these weather events, you know, it snows. Oftentimes there's a lot of wind here.
we try to.
Yeah, so we live in a climate where avalanches are definitely a major concern. And then with all that wind blowing snow, it often loads the top of these gullies and couloirs. And guess what? That's where the ice climbs are. It's in these steep walls in the glacial valleys underneath the fully loaded plateau and the tops of these gullies. And that's where you have usually some overhead hazard wherever you are. And sometimes it's hard to imagine because you're like walking up on 6 inches of snow to the base of your route. But then when you're at the top of the climb, you're stomping around the top, you're like, oh, I'm in a 35-degree gully that's really loaded here. Bringing transceivers and avalanche equipment is becoming more common in ice climbing. But yeah, it's hard to know the conditions above you. So that's definitely a hazard when you're exploring around here. And also descent. So if you top out, sometimes you top out your ice climb around the plateau, you'll walk down a mile or two, and then you're going to drop down a different gully, and you have to go top down on this new descent. And you don't know the conditions in it. Hopefully you have a plan B if it's bad.
Was that correct, Anju?
Yeah.
Could you just talk about maybe some classic climb and grade spread? Because obviously there's the alpine stuff, but there's some cragging, which we actually didn't talk about at all.
Yeah, I mean the cragging is very minimal. There's like cragging in East Rosebud, and you could crag at Rock Creek Falls, and you could crag at Silver Falls in the Lake Fork, but that's like a 2 hour plus approach for a one pillow of water ice 4. That's really, really pretty though. And I would say the grades, I mean, just always in ice climbing, they can change with the conditions. So you can never be set thinking this is gonna be, water ice 4, and then it might change with the temperature.
Yeah, people might argue at this, but I feel like Kelly ice ranges from water ice 3 plus to solid water ice 5, depending on season. But that can happen with any ice climb, right? Like if it bulks up or if it's in really thin conditions or really cold. It just depends on if you're going in the alpine in the middle of winter, the water can turn off on a lot of climbs and it'll just make them much harder. They'll be cold and brittle.
2 more basic questions. Do you have any recommendations for places to stay or restaurants to check out while they're there?
Yeah, let's start with the restaurants to just get some drinks and appetizers, but also some really great stone oven pizza. You can go to the Magpie. Then there's a Prerogatives Kitchen. That's somewhat like a more modern American kitchen, I would say. What else? There's a Mexican place
I'd say those are the 2 main
That's pretty
hits.
much it.
Yeah.
in the winter.
In Red Lodge. The Grizzly is a pretty classic stop
Oh,
if you're
yeah.
in East Rosebud. The Grizzly
Are they
Bar.
open in the winter though?
I've stopped there in the winter.
Because they're closing next week.
Okay, well check there. That's a problem here for sure, is because it's a tourist area, so some things are closed during the winter. But the Grizzly's a classic stop because it's the only place on the way to the Rosebuds. And we recently heard that Montasia and Stillwater, or in Fishtail, is really nice stop, and they have a good bar there too.
And then we have like a couple of motels and hotels in town as well. Like, what is that one?
The Yodeler.
Yodeler.
It's kind of a cool one to stay at. We can definitely recommend that. And then, or having a nice warm vehicle to camp in.
Yeah, there's plenty of Forest Service campgrounds, Airbnbs. This is a resort town.
Yeah.
We have a ski resort actually.
Yep. Yeah, it's kind of a nice off day activity. Let's go skiing here, do some backcountry skiing. Go to Cook City's kind of like pretty famous backcountry skiing area. Good ski mountaineering there too.
You also have some trips coming up. Do you want to talk about those?
Yeah, so we obviously do a bunch of ice climbing around the Beartooths, and these are really awesome alpine objectives, also good course locations because we have some single pitch climbing. But we just got new access to the South Fork and Cody, which Cody's only an hour from Red Lodge. So it can be a good way to link up these two zones, alpine objective or cragging around here, and then some pillars in Cody, see two different areas. That's new to us, and we're excited to be doing some trips there.
We have 2 women's ice climbing retreats in Cody, and the dates are January 26th to 28th and March 1st to 3rd. The guide ratio will be 2 to 1, and there's like 1 day of cragging in there and 1 day of multi-pitch climbing, and we can have up to 6 participants, and then we'll have 3 guides, and lodging and food is all included.
And Allie Pine, that's her handle on Instagram. She's one of the guides, right?
Yeah, and she's a pretty good ice climber and mixed climber based out of Cody.
Most of our trips are custom, a 1 to 2 person on however many days. And we also are offering private trips to Iceland and Norway. So in Iceland, that's in the West Fjords and Bildadur. That's pretty wild climbing, very adventurous. You're climbing right above the fjord. And there's potential for first ascents and long water ice threes, and it's a blast. Norway is in Rjukan, which is kind of an ice climbing destination for Europe, and it's in a deep valley, and that's 7 days kind of in a European setting. There's town infrastructure and lots of ice.
Awesome. That sounds great. The question that we always end on, if you were to give your younger self one piece of beta, what would that be?
It's important to foster your relationships, and it's not about what you're climbing. It's not necessarily even about the climb. It's about who you're with. And so just focus on who you're spending time with and enjoy that, and make sure to maintain those relationships, because these are really valuable experiences that we get to have with the people we love.
When I think about this, looking back to my 20-year-old self, yeah, reach higher than you think. And if you can't find the right partners for that, consider hiring a guide service and follow through with that, because it will definitely open your horizon of not only what's possible, but what's out there and what does actually safety mean. And that is just like a good door opener into a new world that you might think otherwise is not accessible to you.
Well, thank you so much for chatting. It was great to learn a little bit more about your own stories and the Beartooths. So thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you, Aaron.
Thanks for having us. It was nice chatting with you.
That's a wrap for this episode. To learn more about the trips Aki and Anju mentioned, you can head to their website at beartoothguides.com. And if you enjoyed the beta this week, please consider leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform. Or support us on Patreon so we can keep making episodes like this. The link is patreon.com/iceicebeta.